And good evening and welcome to Real Talk, Northeast Ohio School Board races, the priorities, the issues, and controversy. I am your moderator this evening. I'm Jenny Hamel. I'm education reporter for ideastream Public Media. So I've reported on everything from school funding in Ohio and the legislative attempts to make it more equitable for students through the Fair School Funding Plan. But a lot of my time, unsurprisingly, of recent, has been covering schools and universities operating under the very dark cloud of the COVID-19 pandemic. The cartwheels that essentially everyone has had to do at lightning speed to really adapt to a completely new and frankly frightening environment. So kudos to all of you. The pandemic certainly, from a reporter's perspective, has really shined a light on the disparities between the haves and the have-nots, the districts that have resources, were able to go fully remote or able to stay in person, the digital divide that exists, and even the disparities and ultimately the academic outcomes that we saw last year. And now the pandemic, and it's the reason why we're all here, brings us to a different chapter in this world of education. Now, before we move on, we need to thank Real Talk, incredible community partners and contributors who helped bring this and other important issues into focus. Real Talk is a diversity, equity, and inclusion program that addresses inequities and disparities in education, criminal justice, public health, housing, and democracy. Real Talk is hosted by 4 leagues of women voters in Northeast Ohio. They are Akron, Hudson, Greater Cleveland, and Kent in strong partnership with WCPN ideastream, WKSU, the Akron NAACP, and the Freedom Bloc. Now, tonight, we're going to examine the state and the climate of education in terms of issues dominating district policy and its relationship with the community. Then we're going to learn about how our local school boards shape and influence those policies and what the duties of a school board member actually are. Finally, we'll get into a deep discussion with 4 area board members to learn how these issues are impacting their roles and how they're educating kids in their districts. Now, let's begin with the state of education. Tonight, we're going to examine the core issues resonating across the country, Ohio, and right here in our region, Northeast Ohio, especially as it relates to curriculum development, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging initiatives, health mandates, and sadly, personal safety. It is my pleasure to now welcome Lisa Vahey. Lisa's work in volunteering focuses on improving instruction, leadership, and collaboration, always through an equity lens. She is a former classroom teacher and instructional coach and school leader, and she is the co-founder of Honesty for Ohio Education. Lisa, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jenny, and what an honor to be here. I want to start by thanking the league and my own league, Shaker Heights, where I'm a member. So shout out to anyone who's joining us from Shaker. I also really want to thank current board members who are on this Zoom tonight and candidates who might be with us. I also want to acknowledge principals and educators and parents and students. Jenny, you used the word cartwheel, and I think everyone's been cartwheeling a lot this school year and last. Thanks for making time to participate tonight or making time to watch this later for those of you who are joining us via the website. Schools are complicated places. They've always been, but when we were prepping tonight, we actually talked about how this year more than ever. So thanks for being a learner and a listener tonight. I'm excited for the panel that comes after me, so let me keep things moving. Just stay on this slide for one more moment. Jenny mentioned I co-founded Honesty for Ohio Education, and doing that work, especially right now, has helped me recognize that it is important to be talking about contentious issues in our own homes, neighbor to neighbor, and with our elected leaders. That's why we're here tonight, right? To think about these school board elections. I want to be able to ask hard questions, and I hope for honest and thoughtful answers back. And that sometimes means someone saying, I don't know. I'm okay with that. And thank you for that hard question. And in Honesty for Ohio Education, we're asking questions about the ways we teach history. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I'm going to move to the next slide and talk about what we're cartwheeling around. I'm going to take that theme, Jenny, even though I'm not a gymnast at all. I've organized this this presentation into 6 big buckets. Although many of you might choose a different framing for doing this, I'm sharing this list because, as well as being an active volunteer, I'm a coach and a consultant in schools in Ohio, in urban and suburban and rural districts, and across the Midwest. And I work in all kinds of schools. So I haven't Googled this list, but I've talked with leaders and community members, and I'm using my own experience a bit as well. So I'm sharing this list of hard questions that I hope will help prime the pump, not just for tonight's panel, but for the questions you might ask of candidates in your own communities as you look ahead to the next few days before our November 2nd election. These are the issues that come with a board member's job right now, and a superintendent's job too, I'm going to boldly say. So I'm grateful that we're going to start having some hard conversations. And here comes the list. Let's start with health and safety. Will you go to the next slide? So if we had been doing this talk in February 2020, this list might look really different. But now COVID-19 and protocols around health and safety really dominate the work of schools in so many ways right now. And they've changed not just our work in schools, but changed the world too. Many of you are probably pretty familiar with this list and the controversies surrounding vaccines and maskings, especially. We want our kids and we want our educators to be safe, and we want folks to use science to make decisions. But I'm going to actually mention that I put data on this list because we're framing up conversations with boards, and I'd like boards to collect data and use it to notice trends and make adjustments guided by science. And that's hard work right now. Data is a moving piece. And I could add communication to every slide tonight. That rule of thumb, communicate well and communicate often, is hard work, but we do need to count on this from leaders. So as you're talking to candidates, not only about their views on using science and the importance of masks and this, every day, the moving target, just seeing new vaccines approved, but helping yourself become the kind of informed voter that knows where candidates stand on each of these issues and what they think about the data and communication as they lean in to being your liaison in that boardroom. Let's talk about curriculum and transparency for a moment too. This again is impacted by COVID. We've been over the shoulder of our students during a pandemic. It gave us a view many of us don't usually have into what's happening in the classroom. Now, here in Ohio, we have learning standards, and that tells us a lot about what is being taught. And towards the end of this presentation, I'll talk more about who decides this. And because we've been having that over the shoulder experience with our children, some of us are thinking about pedagogy. And you might not know that word, but it means the how of teaching, how teaching happens. And so these issues, because we've seen more of schools, have led to more conversations and controversies more than ever before. I am going to segue for a second here about how Honesty for Ohio Education is thinking about this right now. For instance, we believe that you should teach the complicated truth of our history in our classrooms, and sometimes that teaching of history is hard. The Japanese internment during World War II, anti-Semitism, redlining. And we also think celebration matters as well, right? Landing on the moon. And how about election day? How democracy works is a point of celebration. So as we're thinking about what should be taught, there are 2 bills right now, HB 322 and 327, that seek to change what we teach. And school boards have the responsibilities to be informed and engaged in those kinds of conversations. I see leaders at hearings and I see the written testimony they're providing. And I know we'll be more specific in the panel about how board members are playing a role in addressing controversial bills like HB 322 and 327 in their local districts. And this will continue to be an ongoing issue. And you'll hear more about that when I get a couple slides ahead. I'm going to put assessment and data up next. And again, if I were doing this presentation in February 2020, just moments before the pandemic, this might have actually been the first slide. I'm not ranking the topics at all tonight, but we were talking a lot about state report cards and our desire to know how our schools are doing and how our districts is doing is real. And that means we want to ask board members questions about this, and board members can and should be asking superintendents about this, right? Our boards have just 2 employees that they're really responsible for, and one of them is that superintendent. I put instructional time versus assessing time here and using data to inform decision-making, because what we were talking about before the pandemic was this weighing the pig metaphor. Are we actually getting enough instruction in so that kids have learning opportunities, or are we spending more time measuring how much the pig weighs, right? That metaphor of measuring rather than feeding. And that important conversation has continued as we've started to think about the structure of schools post-pandemic, when we're social distanced, when it's taking more time to move through the hallways or have bathroom breaks. If you know little kids, right, you know how long a kindergarten or first grade bathroom time might take in the best of days. So what it looks like now in the pandemic, I encourage you to ask a kindergarten or first grade teacher right now. This idea of how we know we're being successful, this is one of the most critical issues that our leaders are responsible for. And as voters, we are responsible for asking good questions about it. Let's go to stress and mental health. When I became a teacher in 1994, spoiler alert, right? I've been in this profession a long time. We didn't know as much as we know now about how the brain works and what it means for the stress and anxiety that children bring to school. And frankly, that our young adults and our teenagers bring as well, our high schoolers. I don't want to leave them out in any way. And we also know that stress and anxiety can be created by school, potentially even more so as we're coming back in the pandemic and feeling the tensions of that right now. We also know adults are experiencing stress like never before. We are facing shortages across every role here in Ohio. And I especially want to make sure that we are asking and talking about teacher shortages. In fact, fewer college students in Ohio are choosing teacher education. So this means not all organizations, including our organizations, are thinking about how leaders address stress and mental health of the students in our building, of the educators, and of leaders as well. All of those stakeholders need care and attention, and boards need to be tending to this. I'm going to mention race and equity, and I think because you're here at a Real Talk presentation, this is real for you. Our school systems have inherited inequitable systems and structures, like other systems inside the United States. The language we use, the tension around defining equity and equality in boardrooms and in grocery stores and in parking lots as well, and how we navigate conflict, how we have uncomfortable conversations. This is the work of leaders right now. And in many districts, this idea of talking about race and equity impacts everything we do. And I want to just mention that equity is not just racial equity, but thinking about learning differences, about home language, about our LGBTQ kids and the safe and unsafe feelings they're having about being in school. This is hard work, and this is the work right now. And lastly, I'll just mention family and community engagement. You know, this is why many of us are here. We want to be partners in our school communities. We want to know what's going on. We know and recognize that when communities wrap themselves around the lives of our schools, that good things happen for children. And so this is, again, an ask of our boards. And it is actually reflected in the standards that we have for superintendents and principals and teachers in Ohio, asking them the role that they play in building community. Briefly, Ohio leaders, let's go to the next slide, have quite a few influences. Our strategic plan, our content standards and model curriculums, all the influencing organizations like the Department of Ed and the legislature and the state and local boards of education. This is a lot to manage. but it's important for our leaders to be informed about all these influences. So last slide, as you turn to local school board elections, please take this list with you. Ask questions and listen. Follow up for clarity. And I will boldly say, connect with others. Find your league, find your advocacy organization. This is how I found Honesty for Ohio Ed and other advocates. Connect with other parent leaders, find other stakeholders so that you can be an informed voter and ask your board to be engaged in the work that has never been harder. Thanks so much, Jenny, and thank you to the League for inviting me tonight to talk about this. Jenny, you are mute.
So thanks, Lisa, so much. And thanks for letting me know I was muted. The whole cartwheel kind of metaphor, it just really is understated in what's an incredibly challenging time for educators, school leaders, and students this has been. And considering the important role of school leaders to navigate all of these issues, it's really important to understand what is the actual role of a school board and the duties and responsibilities of each board member elected to those seats. So here to walk us through that framework and the operations of local school boards and their responsibilities is Rick Lewis, who is certainly no stranger to leadership in controversial times. Rick is the chief executive of the Ohio School Boards Association. In his role, he provides leadership for and works to serve 711 boards of education throughout the state. He joined OSBA back in 1984 as a labor relations specialist. He belongs to organizations including the Buckeye Association of School Administrators and the American Association of School Administrators. Rick, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just dive in. And even before we get to the slides, I want to share with everybody, education is the heart of America's progress. It's really our hope for our tomorrow. It's our students' passport to success. And as you look across the state of Ohio, in today's highly competitive world, every community, large or small, they're all faced with increasing educational challenges. And the way they respond affects not only the life of every student, but the growth and the welfare of the community as well. And that responsibility is placed squarely on the shoulders of the men and women who serve on school boards of education across the state of Ohio and America. Now, our association knows, OSBA knows that the challenges facing school boards are enormous, probably more than ever. The school boards who are with us tonight will certainly testify that they're facing economic challenges, societal challenges, political challenges. We're looking at demanding communities, uninvolved parents, over-involved parents, hard to reach children, student discipline, the list goes on and on. But in the end, there are really few greater cause to public service than being involved with public education, because the future of millions of children, not to mention our communities and our nation, are in the hands of those who choose to serve and lead our schools. Now, good school board members can make an enormous difference in people's lives. In almost every community, the school board is the largest single employer, if you think about it. Your school board runs the largest transportation fleet in the area. They run the largest restaurant chain in your city. They have the largest daycare. They run the largest library. It is a multi-million-dollar business. But far too often, the role and the function of school board members are often misinterpreted by the public. So let's talk about that for a few moments. Now, on the first slide, we're going to talk about school board members in general. And this may be remedial, but school board members are elected every other year. Every odd year, we will have an election for school board members. And typically, a school board member serves for 4 years. Generally, there are 5 members on each local board of education. Although, when you get to some of our career centers and our education service centers, I know of boards that are, my goodness, the Great Oaks Career Center down in Southwest Ohio has nearly 40 members on their board of education. But typically, the school boards that you're going to be looking at tonight all have 5 individuals who serve in that role. Now, if you ask what are the qualifications to become a school board member, there are not many. You need to be 18 years of old, you need to be a resident in the district, and you need to complete a petition sometime by August to get on the ballot. And those petitions could range anywhere from a local school district needing 25 signatures, an exempted village may need 25, ESCs I think are around 50, And if you're running for a city school board, it can range from 25 to 300 signatures. But there are no other prerequisites. There's not a certain educational level. There's no experience or background prerequisite, nothing you need to have under your belt to come to this position. And keep in mind, for anybody who becomes a school board member, this becomes a part-time job. Some people, it may be a full-time job, but this takes an enormous amount of time. Now, I said earlier, Ohio needs good school board members more than ever. And again, it's because they can make a difference. Public service as a school board member is not an easy task. It's more than serving 1 or 2 months at a public school board meeting. It's more than passing out diplomas at graduation. It's about making a difference every day in students' lives. And making a difference requires a great deal of training. School board members spend an inordinate amount of time learning about the operations of schools, whether it's school law, legislation, communication, board development, transportation, the list goes on and on. And this is time away from their careers, time away from jobs, time away from family. And I know none of us in this room tonight have an abundance of time on our hands. Now, frankly, the rewards for board service are very few. It's certainly not for the pay. There has to be an easier way to make $125 a month. Versus Florida, some states pay their school board members $45,000, $48,000 a year. But Ohio's got the concept down about paid volunteerism. It's certainly not for the thanks. Nobody calls school board members at midnight to tell them they're doing a great job. You never hear the phone ring to say, you know, that 9.6 mil levy, just perfect. It's exactly what I would have gone for. Or your decision to non-renew the football coach, perfect. We agree with everything that you've ever done. No, you rarely get the positive feedback like that. But at the end, the opportunity to make a school a better place to learn and the opportunity to make a community a better place to live is why school board members do what they do. Because if they do that, they've made a difference in lives. Now, let's talk about school boards again, some more in general. In this state, we have 3,516 school board members. In the best of times, the average tenure of a school board member is really only about 4 years. So it's one term and out. 1/4 of our school board members have less than 2 years of service as we speak. And half of our school board members are in their first term of service. So you can see there's a lot of turnover in school board members in Ohio. We recognized a gentleman a few weeks ago who just completed his 60th year, but that's really the exception. Most school board members serve 4 years. Now, as we look at this year's election, one thing is certain, we're going to see change. 2021 will be no exception to any other year that we've ever seen. Now, in our last election in 2019, we saw a significant increase in the number of candidates, 15% more than in 2017. We jumped from 1,700 to over 2,000 school board candidates. About 800 of those, almost 40% of those running were first timers, and half of them were elected. The remaining 1,939, roughly about, were re-elected or reclaimed their seat. And this is pretty much in line with the 2017, 15, 13 results. This year, we're seeing some anomalies. This year, we see 2,678 candidates. That's 1,277 incumbents and 1,351 challengers. That's 30% more than we had in 2019 and 50% more than we had in 2017. The incumbents are roughly about the same, but we have over 500 more challengers this year than we did last election or the election before that. The other thing I want to share with you before we get into what school boards do is that across the state this year, with over 700 school boards, not all elections are going to be equal. You're going to have some districts that are going to have multiple candidates, 8 people running for 2 spots. You're going to have some schools where the board members are all running unopposed. I've had some people brag they've never had to campaign in their 20 years of service. And we'll see other districts that won't even have a full slate. They'll have 3 openings and 2 people run. And that's one of the things that concerns us. But let's move to the next slide. Let's talk about the powers and duties of a school board member. Or I'm sorry, if we can go back one, I apologize. There we go. Thank you. The board is a policy-making body, and the members of the board are chief advisors to the superintendent on community attitudes. Board members do not manage the day-to-day operations of a school district. They don't participate in evaluations of teachers or other staff. They don't interview coaches. They do not craft the curriculum. But their job is to see to it that the system is managed by professional administrators. School board's authority is limited by the Ohio Revised Code. The law typically tells the school board what they may do, doesn't list all the things that they can. So there's an assumption if you don't have the authority by law to do it in writing, you don't have that authority. It's also worth noting that individual school board members have no authority unless it was designated by the board, for example, to be a spokesperson, but they can only have any authority when they're acting as a group. And that is the only time they can take action. So again, on these slides, everything is dictated by the Ohio Revised Code and they're governed by the legal powers. So if we can go to the next slide as we talk about key responsibilities. There are probably 9 I'd like to touch on tonight. The board hires 2 employees. That's all. They hire a superintendent, they hire a treasurer, and in some city districts, they may hire a business manager. But the board does not select individual teachers. They don't select the coaches. They eventually take action. They approve recommendations to hire those individuals, but they are not on the interviewing or the hiring process. School board members approve budgets, but another important part here is they don't create the budget. That's the treasurer's burden. It's the treasurer who sits alone in a room at night and with his calculator and spreadsheet or her files and goes through everything. But the board has to make the final decision, and they need to be the individuals who ask the tough questions. Boards are charged with providing safe facilities. That means they need to be aware of are the facilities functioning well? Do we need improvements to the buildings? Are they conducive to learning? Maybe we need new buildings. Those are all decisions of the board. And the board must also provide resources for teaching and learning. And that may also mean creating a school levy when necessary. Again, something no board enjoys to do, but it's a necessity and it's their legal responsibility. If we can go to the next slide, we'll continue on the key responsibilities. Boards need to adopt policies. In the old days, these were 3-ring notebooks, about 500 pages, and often sat on a shelf with dust on them. But now boards are more sophisticated. They're all online on websites. But the important part is boards are visionary in their policy adoption. They're kind of like, when did Noah build the ark? Before the rain. And that's what school boards do. They adopt policies. So the board, the community, the staff, the students all know in advance what the board's position is on any subject. And that is widely communicated. The board considers recommendations from the superintendent or the treasurer. And the important part there to remember is the board is phase 2. The superintendent, the treasurer, as we've talked about earlier tonight, they'll do the due diligence, they'll do the homework, they will come to the board with a recommendation. Then it's the board's turn to ask the tough questions, tear it up, push back, whatever they need to do, but convince the board that these are solid recommendations, and then they will approve so they can be implemented by the staff. And then again, monitoring the progress of all the work of the school district. I love the analogy today of weighing the pig. That was great, and I haven't heard that one before. Unfortunately, with the report cards that were given today and the auditing standards, it does become necessary for school boards to have a lot of monitoring and evaluating as things go on. They would much rather be spending time on being creative and getting innovative with education, but very, very frequently, school boards are bound by legislative directive and curriculum and minimum standards, and they do need to make certain they are complying. If we look at the next slide, we've already touched on evaluating progress towards the goals a little bit, but another huge phrase that I want to talk about is informing and communicating with the public. That's something that's imperative for the boards. They need to talk to the community and make certain that the community is up to speed. Now, the next slide will talk about the 5 pillars of governance. Boards provide vision, they provide structure, advocacy, accountability, and leadership. No one is more important than the other, and if you take away anyone, the house is not as strong. Let's talk about vision, the next slide. Boards focus on the end results. They make certain that the values, the beliefs, the desires of the community are captured. Boards ask the questions like where and why and how much, while the superintendent will be asking questions like who and how and when. But the board will always keep students as the focus. They'll adopt a shared vision based on community beliefs, and they'll demonstrate a strong commitment to that shared vision by using their stakeholders and their community members to guide those decisions. The next slide talks about structure. Structure is where the school board will support the district's vision and empower the staff. They hire the superintendent and create a management structure that enables people, it enables teaching, and enables learning. They establish a process to manage the system. They develop long-term plans and revisit them annually. They adopt the policies that we talked about. They set high instructional standards, and they encourage an innovative learning environment. The next slide addresses advocacy. Boards have a powerful voice, especially when school boards work together with other school boards. When they sing as a choir, it becomes a very, very powerful voice. This advocacy can be in the legislature, the courts, the court of public opinion. It can be at the local level, the state level, or the national level. But basically, school boards get out. They seek resources to expand opportunities. Perhaps that's state funding. They advocate for families and children through partnerships. Maybe that's social services. They lead celebrations of student achievement. And that's why we're here. Too often we get caught up in budgets and beans and basketballs and buses, and we really need to concentrate on student achievement. And they promote school board service as a meaningful way to contribute to society. When we talk about accountability, the next slide, there's this old joke about, or an old story, Alice in Wonderland, when she gets to a fork in the road and the Cheshire Cat appears, and she asks which way she should go. And the cat asks of her, well, where are you going? And she says, I don't know. And the cat replies, well, then either pathway will be fine. Boards need to know where they're going. They need to measure their progress. They need to monitor through quality assessments. They need to evaluate the superintendent and treasurer. They need to evaluate progress towards their long-term goals. And most importantly, they need to report back to the district those progresses. And then the final slide is ethical leadership. Very simple. Do things right. Do them for the right reasons. If school boards are able to put children at the front of every decision they make, their students, then they can't go wrong. They may find new information appears later that may have proven that a different pathway may have been better, but they make the best decisions they can based on the best information they have at the time and move forward. And you see some other slides here. We talk about taking business in a fair, respectful manner, but at the end of the day, being a role model means that know that you're always being watched. So I think that was the last slide, but in conclusion, I want to share another moment or two of parting thoughts. The rewards, as I said, can be great. School boards can improve the quality of education. They improve the chances of children to be successful. They improve the possibility of a stronger Ohio. President Eisenhower once said, nothing is more important to our future than education. Not military preparedness, because armed might is worthless if it lacks the brain power to build a world of peace. Not our productive economy, because we can't sustain growth without trained manpower. And not even our democratic system of government, because freedom is fragile if our citizens are ignorant. So, ladies and gentlemen, OSB wants to thank all of you who are participating in the audience this evening. You're now becoming part of an integral part of the democratic process. Your voice of citizen leadership can make a great impact. After your due diligence, I hope you'll inform your community which candidates you think can make the biggest difference for public education in your schools. I also want to take a moment to thank the school board members who are with us tonight, not just for participating this evening, but for their willingness to pay forward and serve their communities. Their devotion to duty will obviously benefit this year's graduating class, but it will benefit the kindergarten class of 2034 and every succeeding group of students. We look forward to working with all of you for strong schools and a stronger Ohio. Jenny, thank you again for the opportunity to be here tonight.
Well said. And thank you, Rick, for explaining, I think some fundamental aspects to a school board that many people don't know. It's such important information. And I think, again, when people are stepping into these candidacy roles and talking about school boards, they don't always know all the intricacies that go on and what you all are focused on. So we have to really consider this, especially when we are considering school board candidates to fill those roles. So now we're really fortunate to be joined by 4 Northeast Ohio school board members dealing with some very contentious times, contentious issues. When we've got the health mandates related to COVID-19, curriculum development, conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, conversations about race. Now, some are joining us, are longstanding board members, and some are relatively new to the role. So now I'd like to introduce our panelists. Nancy Brown is a member of the Stow-Munroe Falls Board of Education, where she serves on the Safety Committee, the Facilities Committee, and the DEI Community Subcommittee. She's the head of admissions and marketing at the Arbors at Stow, a long-term care facility, and she's previously a small business owner. Welcome, Nancy. We also have James Field, a longtime resident of Hudson, and he's a member of the Hudson City School Board of Education. He's been on the board since 2011, and he also manages business analytics and consumer programs for Heinen's Fine Foods, and he's president of the Temple Beth Shalom Brotherhood. Welcome, James. We also have Lisa Premer. She's the president of the Bay Village City School District Board of Education. In her time on the board, she has served on the Citizens Advisory Committee and the Ad Hoc Math Textbook Committee. She taught elementary school in 3 other states prior to moving to Bay Village. And we also have Phil Rankin. He's been a Chagrin Falls School Board member since 2017. He's the board representative to the Board Audit Committee, and he's liaison to the Dads Club. He has also served on the Facilities Committee in the past, and he founded and operates Even Mix, a 3D mixing company today with his family. So I'd like to welcome all of you to our roundtable discussion. Thanks for joining this panel. And Rick Lewis with OSBA is also staying on with us. So thanks to all of you. So Nancy, I'd like to ask you first, prior to our joining the discussion, you were talking about how polarized and how divisive the times have been for your school district. And I'd love for you to elaborate and kind of paint a picture of what it's been like from your seat during the last several months.
Oh, thank you. Stow-Munroe Falls is a wonderful community. It's two communities combined, but we're not a terribly racially diverse community. And I think the pandemic, like everybody, caught us all off guard. And to me, it didn't seem political. And I was surprised how political it became, just whether it was a real thing or not, and whether we should keep our kids home and try to get them back in. Luckily, we stayed focused on, we all had the same goal of getting our kids in school 5 days a week as soon as possible, but kind of disagreeing on how to make that happen. And then, of course, as all the racial issues of 2020 unfolded, and then wanting to come forth with a statement about our feelings toward Black Lives Matter and other issues, that's where there began to be some real cracks between how the board members felt. Without a doubt, all 5 of us are committed to the safety and well-being of our students. There's no question about that. But just holding on to some beliefs that there really aren't racial issues, and having a hard time seeing that sometimes. For me as a board member, what became really, really troubling was at the end of the 2020 school year, a lot of parents of Black students and other non-white students were coming forward and saying they don't feel safe in our schools, and really trying to get at the heart of that. What is that? Is it a school issue? Is it a community issue? And the answer is yes. I mean, it's going to be a combined issue with that, but trying to address that, not always having all of the board members in agreement that, number one, there's a problem, and number two, that what we should be, it's hard to address a problem that you don't think is there. So it is a challenge.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that's carried over into this year as well?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We're the same board, obviously. We'll have at least 1, possibly 2 new members in January, but the current board, we're not all in sync about the need for that. We're at all ends of that spectrum on what we think should be done and if anything should be done. So it's hard, and it's hard. Our community is very divided about that as well.
James, I'll turn to you next. I mean, I know that race has played out in the Hudson School District. I know that, also top of mind for a lot of parents attending your packed school board meetings is the issue of masks. So tell me, what's been top of mind for your school board, or for at least the attendees of your meetings? Excuse me.
Well, if you want me to describe what's been top of mind, that I would take the entire time here. So I'll try and hit on those 2 issues. But So mass, I'll start with that, and then we'll go to the issues of race and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So essentially, I think we're just like any other school board. We're trying to do what's right. We're trying to protect our students, their health and well-being, their mental health and physical health, and the community and the teachers and the staff. And so we go with the guidance of various experts. When we had the children learning remotely, we heard very heavily just how tough that was, especially if you had both parent or one parent who's working or two parents who are working, or even those with parents at home to try and monitor their kids' education. And so a lot of the effort this year was to make sure kids were in school. And we saw mass as a way to make sure that that happened for two reasons. One, actually protecting health. And then two, the quarantine requirements, which has changed, favored if you were wearing a mask that you wouldn't necessarily have to be quarantined. So for those two reasons, and based on the advice we were getting, we went with the mask mandate. Now we've had people present evidence against masks. We have people speaking for that. You know, do they really protect? Do kids really get sick and so forth? And so we listen to all that, take it in, and are constantly re-examining the policy. So I get that people very much disagree with the policy, but for the most part, we've been able to keep kids in school, keep the number of quarantines down. And so from our point of view, it's felt like it's been pretty good. And actually, in our last meeting, we talked about with the vaccines coming and with the new rules, we may be able to go to mask optional very soon. So, you know, the only thing that sort of gets me is this thought that there would be some nefarious reason we would do masks. And what I said at one board meeting is that school boards want to issue recommendations like masks and quarantines, just like we would like to get a root canal. I mean, it's not something you want to do. So in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, similar to what Nancy had talked about, our district is not very diverse, but we do have minorities of various types and those, you know, who are not part of the general population in terms of race, religion, ethnic background, and so forth. And we actually had some racial incidents, some which the public knows about, and many which the public does not know about, but were reported internally. And as we looked at that, we realized that we really needed to re-examine everything. Our harassment policies to define what is racial harassment, how those are approached, you know, how they're, you know, what sort of disciplines take place or how they're investigated. Also in terms of our workforce, which is actually less diverse than our community, how can we throw a wider net? In terms of curriculum, it wasn't so much like that we wanted to change the curriculum. It was more in terms of making sure that we had texts in areas that make sure that all the kids could see themselves as they've been part of our history and our culture. So we had all these different areas and created several different communities, brought in people from the community, people who were experts in various areas, those who were affected in terms of being minorities to get their feedback. And really the idea of the committees was to advise the superintendent and the staff to make recommendations that would then be voted on and people would have the input and so forth. Somehow that effort was translated into some very specific things that weren't actually what was in the effort. And so we've been taken to task for various things. And if I were to boil it down, the two issues I keep hearing is one is equity means equality. And so that means that, you know, all kids, no matter what they do, you know, they'll get the same, they'll all get A's or they'll all, you know, it doesn't matter how much effort they put in, which was not part of it. And I assume that that's sort of a concern about, you know, that we're going to diminish what people do. And it's not, that wasn't part of any effort that we had. The second one was that in terms of tolerance and inclusion, that we would advocate for certain things. So if people were worried, you know, if in their homes or the religion, they taught that a certain thing wasn't morally right, that somehow we were going to contradict that, that if someone was a particular way or a particular background. And we're really not doing that. What we're saying is all the kids need to be treated, included, and not harassed based on their orientation, their background, their religion, and so forth. We're not making a statement as to whether a parent or a family that something is morally correct or not. Just that anything associated with the schools, all the kids need to be able to come and participate and achieve at their fullest without worry about harassment and so forth. So it's been a lot of the problems that we've had are trying to explain what we're actually doing, but we do listen to all the concerns and make sure that what we're doing, we're not doing something that would be truly concerning to others. But hopefully that answers your question on those two issues, what's happening.
So Lisa, I would ask you then, with kind of the divisiveness that we're seeing in districts all over the region, how is it playing out for you? And as board president, is there a feeling that what you tell the public or what you tell the community even matters? Are they listening to your explanation of how the board decides on policies or what you put as your top priority when it comes to the pandemic or potential DEI discussions? Or do you feel like almost like the political tension has gone beyond what the board's doing and it's just a conversation between parents with opposing feelings?
Well, yeah, so definitely my board is not political at all, which I love. I mean, are there some times when some person will drive me crazy or I'm frustrated with them? Yes, but we are all people who can sit down and listen to other points of view and try to come together to come up with a reasonable solution. And I think, as you said, I have a background as an educator myself. I taught for many years in different states. I have a master's in special education from Columbia University. And so when people feel, like James said, that we have this nefarious streak and that we are purposely doing things to hurt children, it's like a personal insult to me. We are all here, as Rick said, because we love children and we want to do what's best for children. And that's school board members, teachers, administrators. I mean, Rick said it, we're not getting paid the big bucks to do this. We're doing this because we really do want to help children. So that is hurtful. And I sometimes think people say we're not being transparent, and it's not really that we're not being transparent. It's that we're not saying what they want to hear. And so then they say you're not being transparent. We have gone over in numerous board meetings the way curriculum is developed, from the way it is handed down as from the state to the way it is then moved along through our district, through teachers, through parents, textbooks, committees, all the way through. And I tell them the same thing. I'll tell you, nothing has changed since March 19th of 2020. We haven't had time to change the curriculum. We have just been busy trying to get through a pandemic. But I think what it comes down to is just a fear and frustration, basically from this pandemic. And as an educator, I go back to when I was teaching 25 years ago, and instead of equity, the word was inclusion of special ed children. And everyone was worried that if we put special ed kids in the normal, typical classroom, the typical child would lose something because the teacher wouldn't have time for their child who was typically developing. Well, what I say to those people is take a deep breath. We did it. We moved special ed children into the regular classroom and everybody benefited. I think, special ed children benefited, typical children, teachers benefited, parents, we've all learned so much. And I don't think any of us would ever want to go back to putting them in a secluded room at the end of the hall by themselves. So I understand. I think it's a little bit of just fear and frustration of how is this equity going to be initiated and how is it going to affect my kid? And, you start talking about people's children, and they're very concerned and they're very defensive and they are fearful. But I wish that they would trust that the majority of people in education are here because they love children and they want to help children. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Absolutely, it did. Thank you. Phil, I want to turn to you. I'd love to hear kind of you summarize what you've learned in your years as a board member about the realities of the job, as opposed to, I think right now, what it seems like a lot of these candidates are running on, at least from a journalist perspective, a lot of cultural issues. Like that is what has taken the fore. And yet, as we've discussed, and as Rick did such a great job laying out, there's certain fundamental responsibilities you have, and some of the job can be not, as quick moving or exciting as everyone kind of makes it out. Like, you're not just going to jump on and suddenly the mask mandate is, so what is the realities of your role, and how do you think it might be misconstrued or not right now by the public?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And I do agree. I think Rick did a great job of really, laying out what is a board member's responsibility, certainly in theory, and I'll tell you very much in practice. Mostly what he said, comes actual in practice. We do, in Chagrin Falls case, we're managing a $32 million budget annually. So, that's a decent sized business. You're the largest employer in the city. I'm not spending all of my time dealing with HR issues and setting policies there, but, our board's responsibility, we act as a body of five, and, we set the policy for the school. So, largely we're setting policy, we're setting direction, we're working on strategy. Certainly, we're looking at capital spending, how much capital spending we're supposed to have during the year. We spend a fair amount of time, cheerleading, recognizing teachers, recognizing kids. The kids' education is the reason that we're there. So you notice that I haven't talked anything about, how much political debates we have, how much time we spend discussing the intricacies of critical race theory. That's not something we focus our time on. So, largely it's the business of the school, and, keeping the strategy of educating our children, be it through COVID. COVID itself, that is that's a massive variable being thrown at the school system. And, of course, we work with our administrators, we work with the teachers, we work with the kids. They all did an incredible job of maintaining education through that time, and if COVID wasn't enough to take on, then certainly there are a lot of, political agendas being thrown at us right now, where it's like, listen, there's a big meat and potatoes job of just educating the kids going on that we need to stay focused on. I think you're muted.
Rick, I'll ask you, and we discussed this on the Sound of Ideas this morning, but your organization recently dissociated itself from the National School Board Association for a letter that was written to President Joe Biden. And from the way that you characterized it, it did not represent Ohio's interests in saying it needed federal help to kind of intervene with, what it was characterizing as domestic terrorists when they are parents that are expressing their opinions. From that 30,000-foot view, though, in Ohio, have you seen examples where parents or community members are going too far and are threatening board members or anything of that nature? And what is the line in which the state board or organization says that is not acceptable? That is not, something that we condone. And at some point, there are protections that need to be had.
Yeah, Jenny, absolutely. Let me back up to the letter for a moment. Some of the reasons that we did take that action, and it was a sad day because we've been associated with that organization for 6 decades, but it did not represent what we are hearing from the Ohio school board members across the state, probably in 3 areas. And again, we understand these are very stressful and difficult times. Probably the polarization is stronger than ever. The rhetoric is stronger than ever. And the civility has eroded more than we've ever seen it before. Having said all of that, school board members across the state welcome, they cherish, they value the interaction of parents. And the action that the National School Boards Association took seemed to have a stifling effect on that. Immediately, parents became concerned. And you asked the question, where's the line? That was the difficulty, is there is no clear demarcation for the average parent. They didn't know if just speaking up would get them in trouble. And we saw an immediate fear from parents about becoming involved with local school board meetings and speaking their thoughts. The second part of that is we would stop far short of calling somebody who, and again, I'm just going to go with an example, somebody who's lost composure, they've lost their temper, they've became very emotional or passionate and raised voice or used language they probably shouldn't have. But we cannot label those individuals as domestic terrorists. And at the same time, I need to be clear that everybody understands this. And this is a question I've received a lot. Well, how do we protect our school board members? And we don't take that at all lightly. If anybody threatens a school board member, coerces them, intimidates them, makes them fear for their safety, their welfare, or their parents, or even their dog, those individuals need to be held accountable for their actions. But where we differ from NSBA, we prefer to start at the local level. School board members across Ohio believe in local control. And that's the wonderful thing about our system of education here in Ohio. With over 700 school districts in the state, every school district has unique needs. One size would never fit all in this state. So that's why we believed, and our members told us, it's important to keep control locally. And so the concept of starting with the federal government, with U.S. Marshals or Homeland Security or Department of Justice intervening right off the bat and coming right into school board offices around the state, that was unacceptable. That was an overreach. Now, back to your question about, is there a line? Again, absolutely. And I'll just reiterate, I guess, what I said earlier. There's no room. Our ability to have civil conversation should not come at the expense of any of the individuals on this panel tonight, or any of the 3,500 school boards in the state being threatened. And I can't be more clear. There needs to be accountability. But I think our school board members, and I'll defer to them this evening, they pride themselves on their relationships with local law enforcement. Many have school resource officers in their buildings, and those who don't have wonderful relationships with all the first responders. And that's where it should start.
Nancy, I'll turn to you now. Have there ever been points where you have felt unsafe or have felt uncomfortable in a very kind of extreme way about what goes on at a school board meeting, especially in the climate of late?
I've never felt unsafe, and I felt uncomfortable, but that's okay. I should feel uncomfortable, but I've never felt that my personal safety was at risk. We have had a situation with community members coming up on stage, and one was very verbally abusive to our superintendent. She kind of crossed a line with that. We've had the police present at our meetings since June. And what was interesting was I heard from members of our Black community that they felt intimidated by that, and having to reassure them that they're here to make sure things don't get out of hand, because it was heated. There was no doubt, and that they were there for everybody's safety and not there to intimidate everyone. But we've been fortunate in that regard. I don't think there's any such thing as an over-involved parent. And even though I don't always agree and don't always particularly like some things that are being said, I think it's great that so many people are turning out and taking an interest and wanting to voice their opinion. And that's my job, to listen.
Another quick question, Nancy. I mean, with a diverse student population and so many different perspectives on what should happen for a school and what's of best interest, how do you make decisions that you feel can properly reflect, as you said, there's nothing, a parent can be as passionate as they want. How do you make decisions that do kind of take into consideration all these different perspectives, and everyone has their kids' best interests at heart? That has got to be a difficult line to walk.
I suppose I think it comes down to education. And I've had one parent, and she's actually a grandparent, in the district, we've fortunately been able to have some really meaningful discussions. And I think the one-on-one conversations are where the difference is going to be made. And in trying to help her understand that the whole point of DEI is not to make white students feel bad, that's not it at all. That's completely against what we're trying to accomplish with DEI, and trying to help them understand, as James explained, maybe some other books in the library that show children who are not white and some non-white authors, and just a bit more inclusive. So the decisions don't come down to, I suppose there needs to be consideration of, does this impact one ethnic group more than another? Is it more equally balanced? But I think when it came to the pandemic, that wasn't an issue. And I don't know of any issues we're facing in our schools right now. The main issues we're looking at, where it's coming down to those decisions, I think it's more of an awareness of do we need to be doing more things? Are there some ways to be more inclusive and more welcoming?
James, I'm curious, what do you think has been the most difficult area for your district this year? I mean, what has caused, kind of the greatest concern or tension? I mean, has it been about COVID related policies? Has it been about, so-called critical race theory being taught in classes? I mean, I know that these are some of the things that some of the candidates, especially the slate of conservative candidates in Hudson are running on. What in your eyes has been, that greatest source of concern?
Well, I would say it's more the COVID. I mean, with the critical race theory, the issue there is that a lot of as Nancy pointed out, a lot of the concerns that people have, from our point of view, we're not doing those. So from our point of view, it's more educational, listening, trying to understand, what we're saying that would give them these concerns. But COVID's real. I mean, you have to make decisions, and they're hard decisions, and they affect people. They affect our kids, and they affect people's lives. And those are really hard decisions. I mean, it's tough if you're a child to wear a mask all day. It's tough to be at home. But on the other hand, if you have a child who's immunocompromised or someone in your family, it's tough to worry about bringing COVID home and having someone either get seriously ill or possibly even die from COVID. So to me, that's really, because that's a very real issue. That's the one that's probably the most concerning. Lately, there's been some issues that have been brought up in terms of curriculum books that people objected to in the library and the curriculum. And those are sort of the issues. I mean, those have been around for a long time, those types of issues. And, we're in the midst of addressing them. But to answer your question, as a school board member, I think the toughest decisions and the toughest discussions we've had have been around what precautions to take for COVID.
Mm-hmm. Lisa, we have an audience question, and the person asks, how do the various boards communicate with the public? Just through board meetings, only one-on-one, and through publications? And I would just like to add to that question. I mean, do you feel like a board, in communicating with the public, that is absolutely paramount that you do that? Because sometimes confusion or a feeling of the board not being transparent with the community, and all these types of things can arise. So how important is that when you take steps in policy setting or make any votes, that you are letting the public know, here's where we are almost at all times?
Hold on. Sorry, I had on mute. Communication is key. And, when we first went into lockdown in 2020, we had some parents who said we were doing too much communication. They're like, stop the emails already. So it's been, kind of trying to find a balance. And I think there are people in our district who are very frustrated, feeling like we are not getting questions answered at board meetings. And I think what a lot of people need to understand is that that's not really the place of a board meeting. A board meeting is for the board to get their work done, and there's a public comment section. We've taken those questions that people ask and we've added them on our website in a frequently asked question period. But one of the things we started during the pandemic was we would do these virtual town halls. And so we have done a number of those in individual buildings via Zoom, where people can do that. We've tried to have, I know I've had coffee, as I think Nancy said, I've had coffee with many community members one-on-one, because I think that gives that, I like to do that. I think that makes us seem like a real person and not some person behind a desk. And you can talk more one-on-one with them. I know our superintendent has been doing coffee talks and coming to early to sporting events where you can do a meet and greet type thing. So we do get you're not answering our questions at the school board meetings, but I'm sure everyone here will tell you school board meetings can go a really long time, and it's really not a place. And as people have said, people are getting heated, people are passionate, and then you go back and forth and it becomes this debate, and it just kind of, the tension gets up, and we have found that keeping it's smaller. And then of course there's the Facebook and Twitter, and we have updated our website to make it easier to kind of navigate, but communication is the key in finding that balance. Of what's enough and what's too much is tough. And like I said, I think sometimes people come to us and say we're not communicating, but they're just not happy with the answer they're getting.
Right. Phil, we're talking about kind of these animated school board meetings and these, fervent and super passionate parents and community members. I wonder, does any of that get to kind of the staff level, your teachers? Are they getting feedback from students who are hearing from the parents? And does it make any of them want to kind of change what they're doing? Have they approached you all, kind of the board members and the administration level of, are we staying the course? Are we doing the right thing? Because there is so much noise coming politically and just from the community about all of these issues that, we're discussing tonight. And how do you temper that? How do you, what do you tell them? How do you lead them?
Well, honestly, it's almost a way that you would manage, as a board, any employee, really. It's like, if you're committed to the course of teaching the kids and developing your strategy, then, you got to keep the course. You really got to keep the course. You got to keep taking public input from your public meetings. That we're a public board. That's what we do. So we allow comment sections at our public board meetings, and we try to, luckily at Chagrin Falls, we've been rather successful, I would say, in keeping things civil by like, okay, these are the rules, this is the policy, these are the rules. You get 3 minutes and make it very apparent to everybody. Mr. Rankin, how much more time do you have left to speak? It's up there clear. I know when I have to end. When I end, it's like, okay, Mr. Rankin, your time is up. Please let the next person speak. So luckily, we've been able to take a lot of good public comment that way. And certainly, in between school board meetings, there always, a chance to email school board members, especially the superintendent and the school administration. I will tell you, certainly they've been taking, a lot of questions, a lot of public information requests in between school board meetings. And to the extent that you're answering the public's questions, that's all fine. That's all fine and good. But, I think our administrators, like any reasonable person, get just a little bit frustrated when they've answered the same question, 5, 10, 15, 20 times.
Sure.
So, their level of frustration gets up a little bit. So, as board members, we try to act as a sounding board for them. It's like, hey, I appreciate what you're doing. We all keep telling each other, it's like, hey, let's keep the course. I appreciate what you're doing. Keep going forward. Keep answering their questions. Just answer it as efficiently as you can. And if we keep talking our way through this, we like to really believe that, hey, we've got a reasonable community of people here. It's like, we're going to get through this.
Yeah. Thank you. Rick, so you're talking about this historic number of new candidates vying for these school board seats. Do you have any concern about school boards being filled with a bunch of newbies, or, is there any training? That's what one audience member asked. Does OSBA provide training for new or even experienced school board members? And do you see potentially kind of a year of school board seats that look very different post and pre-November 2nd?
A lot of questions there, Jamie. Let's see if I can tackle those. I'm not really concerned about a large number of new school board members. It's nothing to be frightened of. I think people who are new to the board will bring new and fresh ideas and ask questions that perhaps haven't been asked before. Every one of our board members started new at some time, so there's a learning curve. But we've had some outstanding board members, and they all had to start somewhere. We do provide training. We actually start before somebody even becomes a candidate. We run free workshops about, so you want to be a school board member, and then we'll provide additional training if you're a board candidate. We run programs if they're a new board member, and then we run a number of programs for the veteran, the experienced board members who just want to continue that professional development and lifelong learning. I think over 85% of the school board members in the state will attend one of our events to learn more and better themselves and better prepare themselves for a job every single year. So school board members are an industrious lot that take it upon themselves to just get better every single day. If there was any concern I had about the new class, my hope would be those that are elected by their communities are simply not single issue candidates. School board members are elected for 4 years, and you've heard us talk all night about their charge. It's an enormous task, and the job is to raise the bar on student achievement, provide a world-class education, and help the students succeed and have better lives and make the community better. If an individual comes in with just a single issue, they're still there for 4 years, and they need to be prepared to take on the mantle of all these other difficult decisions and different agendas. Because if it's just one and done, they're not going to be as effective as if they're concerned about the big picture. And I'm hopeful that every year, we see turnover in our membership. I'm guessing somewhere probably 800 seats may change this year, but every year we'll have that turnover, and we do get some awesome board members coming through. So hopefully those who have the best interest of the district at heart are able to add their names to those roles.
Well, thanks so much, Rick. And I'd like to thank all of you. Unfortunately, we are out of time for a roundtable discussion. I feel like I only got a couple of questions with each of you, but that's just the nature of these forums. So thank you so much for spending time with us. Rick Lewis with OSBA, thank you so much. Nancy Brown with Stow-Munroe Board of Education, thank you so much. James Field, I appreciate you joining us with the Hudson City School Board. Lisa Premer with Bay Village City School Board of Education, thank you so much. And of course, Phil Rankin, President of the Chagrin Falls School Board. I appreciate all of you for joining us and for being so candid and for doing the job that you do. These kids are our pride and joys, and we know you have their best interests at heart. So thank you for all the hard work. Now I'd like to toss it over to Cynthia Peoples. She is the chair of the Real Talk program and state board member of the League of Women Voters Ohio. She's going to offer different tools and resources to research your school board candidates and vote in this year's general election on November 2nd, if you haven't already. Cynthia.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Lisa Vahey, Rick Lewis, and our distinguished, hardworking school board members who are obviously wading through some very complicated and challenging issues. We built tonight's program to provide a better sense of the roles and the responsibilities that our local school boards and our local school board members play in really resolving and addressing these and other very complex issues. Now, these are issues that, as you've come to understand, directly and indirectly impact student learning and the student and staff experience. We always need to remember the staff. So it's extremely important that we as citizens each do our part to civically engage, thoughtfully research, and vote for candidates to fill these seats at every given opportunity to do so. Election Day is less than a week away, as you've heard several times during this program. It does fall on Tuesday, November 2nd of next week, and we're very fortunate here in Ohio to actually have 3 different ways to vote, 2 of which begin nearly 1 month ahead of Election Day. So let's go ahead and take a look at those 3 options. Registered voters can opt to vote early in person at their designated early vote center, which is most likely your local board of elections. So early voting does run every day through Monday of next week, and you can click on the link in the chat to find your hours and locations. Second way is absentee ballot voting, which runs all the way through November 2nd. Now, it's really important here to request your absentee ballot now. The deadline to request that ballot is October 30th. The earlier that you request it, the earlier you can get it out. Just a note that once you do receive and complete your ballot, you also have 2 ways to return it. You can either postmark and mail that ballot by November 1st, or you can actually go ahead and drop it off at your local board of elections all the way up through Election Day on November 2nd. And those wanting to cast a traditional ballot on Election Day can go ahead and head over to their designated polling location on Tuesday. Polls are open from 6:30 in the morning through 7:30 in the evening. Having been a poll worker, that is a very long day, but well worth the hours. Be sure to bring your proper voting ID, and you can find that information in the link in the chat as well. Please, before you head out to vote or drop that ballot in the mail, be sure to research your candidates. We cannot emphasize that enough, how important it is to be an informed voter. The League works very hard year in and year out to provide excellent resources to help you do just that. The first place that we'd encourage you to start is to head over to vote411.org. You simply enter your address on the screen on the home page there, and every race and candidate on your ballot will instantly appear on your screen. You can click on each candidate to read their unedited responses to candidate questions, and it gives you an opportunity to learn a little bit more about their background. Now, from there, what's really great is that you can go ahead and select each of the candidates that you prefer and create what's called a sample ballot. And once you create that sample ballot, you can go ahead and print it out. And what's great about this is that you can use that printed sample ballot to complete your actual voting ballot. You can do that at home. You can lie them down side by side, or you can take that printed sample ballot to the polls and use it to remind you about which candidate actually resonated with you while you were researching. You can find polling locations and other really important voting information on vote411.org as well. Another way that you can research your candidates is to read and share the printed League voter guide. Now, this is just actually the hard copy version of vote411.org, but it really zeroes in on races and candidates specifically in your county or your community. Those printed voter guides are normally an insert in your local newspaper. They normally start circulating around the time that early voting begins. They can also be found at your local libraries, different eateries, and other shops in your area. Next, what we really strongly encourage you to do is to attend or watch your local League candidate forums. Now, this is where your candidates really come to life, and they answer those questions that go beyond what were proposed or posed, in vote411.org, and you can contact your local League and they'll share the links to those recorded forums. And of course, at any time of the year, we always encourage you to watch or attend your local school board meetings to really get a sense of those issues and priorities in your district and how your board is responding to those priorities and issues. We walk through several of those tonight. You know, there's nothing like being at a live board meeting, especially right now. But I mean, even when the issues aren't so contentious and sometimes aggressive, we definitely encourage you attending those meetings and ask your board members questions afterwards. They're always, just like you heard tonight, they're always open to receiving emails and phone calls. Many of those board meetings are live streamed and the recordings are typically available on your district's website. Again, we do want to thank everyone for joining us tonight and other Real Talk programs. We love seeing familiar names, faces, and organizations at all of our events. And if you'd like to learn more about all of our Real Talk leagues, you can see them there on the screen. Or if you're just interested in connecting with any of our incredible community partners, you can do so by visiting their websites. Those links are also in the chat. And thank you to Michael Barron for working so hard tonight, dropping just rapid fire all those links in the chat. He's such a rock star in that regard. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jenny to bring us home.
Thanks so much, Cynthia. And I want to thank you for having me as the moderator of this discussion. This concludes the end of our Real Talk discussion about these school board races, the priorities, issues, and the controversies. Again, to the school board members, Rick with OSBA, who participated tonight, so much thanks. And I really could have talked with each of you probably ad nauseum all night long about how it's been for you and what your roles really entail. So I do appreciate a bit of your time. And to the public, for tuning in, for caring about your communities, for caring about these school board races and who ultimately ends up winning seats and leading again the kids, which is everyone's top priority. I thank all of you for joining. So that concludes our forum. I hope you all have a great night, and don't forget to vote. All right, take care, everyone.